Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Fibres and Fabrics series. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend checking that out first because I will be expanding on some of that information. This video is all about animal materials, vegan synthetics, and what the different options are. Now I know that this can be a dilemma. It's a dilemma for me because on one hand, there are terrible animal cruelty issues, but on the other, a lot of the vegan alternatives can be pretty damaging to the environment. Now this video is not about telling you what to do. I really believe that it's up to each person to make the decisions that you're most comfortable with. But it is important to make informed decisions, so I really encourage you to research both sides of these issues, and I'm going to try my best to give you different options. So first, let's talk about leather. I'm sure you know that it comes from the skin of animals, mostly cows, and it's the primary material for shoes and bags. It's pretty much everywhere. Now there is horrific animal abuse in the production of leather. I'm not going to show any images or really get into it, but if you don't know much about it, please do some research. There's lots of information online and exposés into the leather industry. It is stomach churning and heartbreaking and truly horrific the way that animals are treated and abused and slaughtered. And then the leather has to become a material, and this involves a lot of toxic chemicals. Because leather is skin, it decomposes and breaks down, and in order to prevent that, it has to be treated and tanned. The most common type of tanning is chrome tanning. It uses chromium salts, which are not only toxic and carcinogenic to the workers, but pollute the water and land around tanneries and can affect entire communities. Now there are less toxic ways to tan leather, such as vegetable tanning, but chrome tanning makes up the majority of leather, about 75 to 80%. And according to the Environmental Protection Agency, chrome tanning is used in about 90% of US leather production. Now the synthetic alternatives can unfortunately also be very polluting. Polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, is the worst. It's made from petroleum and uses large amounts of energy to produce. PVC bags and shoes contain toxic ingredients like phthalates and are often treated with lead and flame retardants. It also doesn't biodegrade and can't be recycled. A common vegan leather is polyurethane, and it's definitely less toxic than PVC, but it's also made from petrochemicals, is energy intensive and polluting to make, and doesn't biodegrade. Some brands will develop their own synthetic leathers, but because these are proprietary, they can unfortunately be difficult to get more information on and find out how they were made and what's in them. You might also see recycled PET, which is great in some aspects. They take plastic bottles and break them down, turning them into fabrics. But this also uses a lot of energy and creates toxic pollution. So what can you do? I think buying either leather or synthetic leather secondhand is definitely the most sustainable. I've had a few questions on my thoughts on buying animal materials secondhand, and I think it's great. You get the benefits of the material without supporting the industry, it requires no new resources or chemicals to make, and you're preventing something from going into the landfill. Another good option is to buy recycled or upcycled leather products for similar reasons. There are natural material options. You can find bags and shoes made out of cotton, hemp, rubber, cork, and other materials. Unfortunately, they can be a little difficult to find and are often in limited styles, but this does seem to be improving and there seems to be more natural options available. If you are buying synthetic leather new, avoid PVC and look for less harmful alternatives or recycled synthetics. Also, I didn't want to go into these in depth because they're not fully developed or widely available, but there are companies working on more sustainable leather alternatives, things like leather grown from bacteria. So hopefully someday soon there will be more options available. Now for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about fur and faux fur because it has pretty much the same issues as leather and fake leather, and most people tend to know quite a bit about fur production. But what I did want to briefly discuss, and something that's different between leather and fur, is normalizing the wearing of it. So leather is super common, and seeing leather or leather look products is really normal. But fur, on the other hand, has kind of come and gone with trends. So while there's no risk in normalizing the wearing of leather by purchasing secondhand leather or synthetic leather, it is something to think about with fur. Next, I want to talk about down, and with clothing, this is mostly only found in winter coats. Down is the fine feathers, usually from ducks and geese, and it's fluffy and insulating. It also has a lot of animal cruelty issues, the most common and torturous of which is that the birds can be plucked alive. A lot of geese are also force-fed for foie gras. Fortunately though, buying new down is pretty easy to avoid, and there are some good options to keep you warm in the winter. There are quite a few synthetic alternatives, but a lot of them do tend to be proprietary, so just try to do your research and choose ones that have less of an environmental impact. Again, buying secondhand is a great option. There also are coats made out of natural materials like cotton or hemp, but these are less insulating. Another option is recycled down, and this uses down from older blankets, pillows, and coats. They clean it and fluff it up and turn it into new coats. And this is a great way to get the benefits of natural down without supporting the cruel practices, and it reuses it. Wool is another natural insulating material, but it's also an animal fiber, so let's talk about it now. The majority of wool comes from sheep, but it can also come from alpacas, goats, and other animals. But I'm going to mainly be discussing sheep wool. Again, there are a lot of animal cruelty issues. There's a practice with merino sheep called mulesing where they cut chunks of their skin away. Thankfully, this is banned in a lot of countries, but it's still legal in Australia, which is one of the top suppliers of merino wool. There's also something called sheep dipping, where they use toxic pesticides to kill any insects or parasites that are on the sheep. The sheep can also be shorn in a very rough and abusive way. Now, the common synthetic alternative to wool is acrylic, and as you saw in part 1, it's not a very good fiber and is one of the more toxic and unsustainable synthetics. Synthetic fleece is a common vegan substitute for wool sweaters, and it's unfortunately one of the worst offenders when it comes to shedding plastic microfibers that pollute the oceans. So what are your options? You can probably guess what my first one is: shop secondhand. Wool is an extremely durable fiber, and I found some beautiful wool clothes in thrift and vintage stores. You can also look for brands that use recycled or upcycled materials, and I will talk more about this in part 3, which should hopefully be out in 2 weeks. You can find cotton alternatives to wool clothes, but with certain things like sweaters or athletic wear, you do lose some of the great properties that wool as a fiber has. If you're going the synthetic route, try to choose less harmful synthetics. There are lots of options with athletic and performance wear, but unfortunately not so many in the yarn sweaters category. If you want the properties of wool, look for certified organic wool and research the certifications. Some of them will include criteria for the care and well-being of the animals. Alpaca is also often considered to be a more sustainable wool, and there are some companies that have good traceability and codes of conduct for the care and treatment of their animals. If you are a knitter who uses wool, I really encourage you to look for and check out any small farms that might be in your area. I've met some wonderful sheep and alpaca farmers who truly love their animals and care for them really well. They're also often really happy to show you around and answer any questions that you might have. It's not only much more sustainable to source materials in your area, but I think if you have the option, it's good to support small businesses like that. Finally, this is a little off topic, but I wanted to share it because I think it's awesome and it was really inspiring to me when I was working on my final sustainability collection for my fashion design degree. There is a UK company called Izzy Lane, and they actually rescue sheep from slaughter, often because they are male, didn't get pregnant, too small, have spots or imperfections in their wool, and these sheep live the rest of their lives in their sanctuary. And they are able to do this by creating and selling wool clothes from their sheep. And I personally think that's really amazing and good to support, and they're showing that wool can be farmed in a more ethical way. Finally, there's silk, and this comes from silkworms, which aren't actually worms at all, they're caterpillars, and the silk comes from their cocoon. In the normal life cycle of a silkworm, they create a cocoon, turn into a moth, make a hole in the cocoon, and crawl out. Now, this hole damages the silk fibers. So what usually happens is the cocoons are thrown in boiling water, killing the silkworms. Therefore, silk is not at all a cruelty-free fabric. Some of the main characteristics of silk are the soft hand and nice drape, and these can be found with synthetics like nylon, rayon, modal, which is very similar to rayon, and lyocell. Of these options, lyocell, also called tencel, is the most sustainable choice and can be made to have a similar softness and drape, but doesn't have the same natural sheen. Shiny synthetics are usually nylon or polyester, which can be pretty damaging to the environment. Again, shopping secondhand is a great option. There also is something called pea silk, where they let the moth leave the cocoon before harvesting the fibers. But I read an article recently about how pea silk might not be as cruelty-free or might be even crueler than regular silk. Basically, when the moths leave the cocoon, they have been bred so that they can't eat. So they just mate, lay a bunch of eggs, and then end up dying from starvation. And since there are so many eggs, a lot of caterpillars hatch, and there often isn't enough food for all of these caterpillars, so a lot of them die of starvation too. Now, this was just one article that I read, and I definitely want to do more research into this, but pea silk, unfortunately, might not be the cruelty-free option that I hoped it was. So I hope you found this interesting. I really encourage you to do more research into these materials and issues because I definitely can't cover everything in a 10-minute video. I will include some links below if you want to check those out, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. There definitely are a lot of factors to weigh in this particular area of ethical fashion, but I think it's important to try your best to make mindful decisions that best align with your values and to continue to learn. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you found it informative, and I will see you in the next one.